Hello, and welcome to my first official book review on this channel. I'm going to be looking at R.F. Kuang's Babel, or Babel. I pronounce it Babel, but I have heard other people pronounce it the other way. And I loved this book. I'm going to do an 8-point review just to keep myself focused because I'm really good at digressions and wandering off into my own little world. So let's get into it. All right, point 1, the cozy vibes in the first half of this book. There is a very particular audience that I feel like R.F. Kuang is reaching out to, and that is people who were a fan of a certain wizard school series when they were younger. It's set in Victorian Oxford, and the school has a magical department. And the students that we follow are part of that department, and they move up through the ranks as they go through their 4 years at this school. And the vibes are perfect. It draws you in. It makes this place feel cozy, familiar, comforting. You never want to leave. And you can see that in the cover art of this edition, where it's kind of, you've got the birds, and it's like the what is it, the ink lino cut, there we go, kind of look. And it's just, the vibes in the beginning of this book are wonderful, and there's a very specific reason why the author put so much work into making this book so cozy and comfortable. All right, point 2, Colonialism and Empire. It's impossible to write about Victorian England and not address the British Empire in some way. And I love how this book does that. You get to experience things from both sides of the coin. You get to see what empire offers the citizens, i.e. the white people, back in England, and you see kind of the lavishness and the lack of worry about want that really keeps everything going. And on the other side of that, you do get a very good sense of the cost for all of that luxury, and you get to see the effects that has on other nations. And there's always, there's a recurring theme of the English characters saying, oh, well, everyone has an equal opportunity. They can do all of this if they want. They're just obviously choosing not to. And this book really gets into why that is and what the British Empire does that makes it impossible for other nations to ever catch up to it. And it's really, really well done, and I really appreciate that aspect of this. All right, point 3, language and magic. At the heart of this book is a very unique magic system that I think is probably the most unique magic system I've ever encountered in a book before, but it's based on the idea of translation, specifically the elements of words that are lost in translation when you move from one language to another. There is the magical MacGuffin of this is silver, which has a unique property of capturing the elements of words or phrases that are lost in translation and turning that into an outward effect, a magical force of some kind. Every kind of, every silver bar that has a matched pair of words on it does something different based on kind of what those words mean. And it's just absolutely fascinating. I love the linguistics of it. I love the etymology discussions surrounding it. I love the ways in which language is kind of picked apart, and you really come to see language as like a living thing, not as just a list of words that has like an equivalent in another language. You really see kind of the arrogance that comes from translating anything at all, where you think, I can take this other language and I can transform it into my language and I can still understand it perfectly, which we know isn't the case. Even when you have really fantastic translations, there's always going to be something important that's lost. And this book really explores not just the philosophical ramifications of it, but the effects of cultures interacting, and how cultures that tend to have more power and can overpower another culture, the effect that that has on how language moves back and forth between the two of them. And it's just, it blew my mind in a million different ways, and I just adored it. All right, point 4 is dialogue. One of the criticisms that I saw of this online is people found the dialogue a little preachy and a little info dumpy, and they didn't feel that that kind of language was realistic. They didn't think that it really fit. And it didn't really bother me. This book is set in what's essentially like a university, or more like a grad school. And anyone who's been in grad school knows that that's just how people talk in classrooms. Everyone is always looking to get like the upper hand and to impress the instructor and to say something that is just mind-blowing. And you'll have moments where someone else will say something and it'll inspire you, and you'll make a connection that kind of surprises you at the same time as you're saying it. And people just are like that. And people, unfortunately, grad students are very pretentious. And a lot of us get over it eventually, kind of, maybe. But for the most part, that's just kind of how that is. And when you have something like this where the people in charge are very proud of themselves for being in charge of this institution that essentially drives the British Empire, you're going to have lots of people wanting to give, speeches about how all this works, and correct other people when they don't notice things, because everyone just really wants to show off how important they are in their own minds. And so the dialogue, I didn't feel it preachy. It reminded me a lot of the dialogue in something like Jurassic Park by like Michael Crichton. There's lots of times in that where someone will go off on a tangent explaining a certain kind of computer to the main characters, like, oh, you don't know about this? This is the whatever, whatever, whatever. And they go on and on and on about it. And it just fits, because in that, like, it's a techno thriller. Everyone in that book is obsessed with technology, and it's all about the conceit of technology. And thinking that you can kind of do anything with it, even overwrite laws of nature. And so in that one, you have characters who kind of give speeches all the time. And I don't really see the difference between that and this, because it's the same kind of thing. There's an arrogance to it. And so everyone is going to want to explain how things work. And there is a lot of, declamation. And conversely, you're going to have other characters who aren't a part of that, who are desperately trying to get the English characters to believe them, to see them as people, to see that their culture has value beyond just being a resource. And so, of course, you're going to have people sort of trying to one-up everyone else. And so there is lots of people kind of passionately declaiming, what it is that they stand for, but it fits. It really fits, and I don't think it's an issue at all. So point 5 is non-white perspectives, and I've kind of addressed this before, but I know some reviewers of this book said that they had trouble relating to the main characters because they weren't white, which that's the point of reading, is to get inside other people's heads and to learn about other perspectives. But whatever. This one, it really does a good job of giving you the look at what academia is like from an outsider's perspective. Even if through a blurry lens, these characters are well respected, well regarded, their tuition's taken care of, their room and board's taken care of. Everything about them is sort of, you'd think it would be ideal, but this book really does a good job of showing the systemic racism and the moments when these characters are reminded by other people that they really don't belong, or that they don't think that they belong. And I really, really appreciated that. It's chilling at times, but it's necessary. And we need more books like that have those kinds of perspectives where you can see the little, like the microaggressions. oftentimes when books want to make a statement about racism, they tend to exaggerate them a bit so you can kind of notice them and pay attention to them if you're not looking for them. But this book really does a good job of having those little things, those little reminders that other people make about them, um, that just stand out and remind them that this isn't where they should be according to the people who are there already. And I love that we get inside the heads of these characters where we can see those moments. And even if it seems like it's something small, we see them react and we know, oh, okay, all right. And I really appreciated those perspectives. All right, so point 6 is the footnotes. This is another something that a few reviewers said that it took them out. They didn't understand them. They thought that footnotes were a sign that the author, wasn't doing a good enough job world building within the text, and so had to kind of have extra information thrown in there. And I'm going to respectfully disagree with that. The subtitle of the book is An Arcane History. And so the book is very much, it's a novel, but it is also set up as like a history text. And the footnotes are there for a very specific reason. One, it's to remind you that history is always created by those who win. And a lot of the footnotes are based on kind of giving another perspective on something that a character mentions. Someone will mention like a famous explorer, and then the footnote will kind of tell you what that explorer is known for, something like that. You need kind of something to take you out of the text and keep you from getting too comfy in this world and pointing out just what's going on. And there's two kinds of footnotes, which I really liked, and I think this works really well. There's some that are based in genuine real-world history that we can recognize from our own past. And then there's other footnotes that are based in sort of this alternate history. So this alternate version of Victorian England. And that does a really good job of kind of blending the two together and creating this world that feels real and familiar. And so when characters make points about racist moments in history, you stop and think, because you're like, okay, well, that actually happened. That's a real thing. The racism in the book is real, even if the fantasy elements are not. And I really like how the footnotes worked to do that. Now, with that said, this book is not dry. It is not dull. It's not, preachy or rambly. This is a gripping novel, and the characters are wonderful. But I appreciate that the footnotes are there to kind of first comment on the action. The footnotes are almost like a Greek chorus of sorts. And there's some moments of kind of dark humor that I really appreciated. But the footnotes are also there to remind us exactly what kind of book we're reading. This is a book about history, about culture, and those footnotes are really important for that. All right, so point 7 is the flow of the story. I mentioned early on that the cozy vibes in the first half of the book really draw you in, and that's intentional because the second half really subverts a lot of expectations. It takes you in new directions that I thought was just really wonderful. There's things that started happening and I was like, whoa, like it went from being kind of a cozy, dark academia into sort of a thriller. And the author does a really good job of keeping you on your toes, because you get to a point where you don't get comfortable anymore, even though you were so comfortable in the beginning. And that's very intentional, because as the characters start to realize that something's going on in this world, you, the author, or you, the reader, start to realize that something is very wrong and that things need to happen to move on. So I know that there were some readers who found that the change in tone as the book progressed sort of threw them off, but I think it works really well. This is a book that's designed to keep you on your toes and keep you kind of a little uncomfortable. This isn't a cozy, fun, heartwarming, sweet book about friends at school. It's a book about empire and the ramifications of that. And I love the way that as the story progresses, the author keeps pulling the rug out from under your feet. So you genuinely have to keep reading because you don't know what's going to happen next. And so that ramps up the pacing really quickly. The second half just flew by. When I first read this, I was like devouring the last third of it because I had to get to the end and see kind of where things were going. So it's a slow burn at the beginning, and then it picks up, and then things keep happening, and it's just a race to the end. And I think that worked really, really well. And point 8, the ending. Now, I'm going to try to keep this as spoiler-free as possible, but if you want to avoid any hint of anything that could suggest anything that would happen at the end, you might want to skip ahead to the ending of the video. The end of this book I can see being a little polarizing, but I feel like it had to end that way, and there's no other way that could have happened. There is a almost unrealistic, well, not unrealistic, but there's kind of an idealized sense of like human goodness and the capacity for people to make the right decision, and, you know, sacrifice their comfort for something bigger than, bigger than them, something more important than their own comfort. And while I don't necessarily think that as many people would be willing to do that, especially if the choice is thrust upon them at the last minute, I feel like a more realistic ending, which would have been, I'm trying not to avoid spoilers here, but if there had been a more realistic ending where the relentless force of Empire was just unable to be stopped or slowed in any way, just barreled over all the characters, and they failed ultimately at their task, then I think that would have been incredibly grim, and it would have been really unsatisfying. This book is very much in the tradition of 19th century melodramas. I'm thinking of A Tale of Two Cities, Les Miserables, stories where, you know, characters stand up for what's right and kind of do the heroic thing. And it's almost supernatural how kind of good and honest and brave and valiant they are. And I feel like if this book had ended any other way, I would have thrown it across the room and probably never wanted to read it again. And so because you have that kind of do you hear the people sing sort of moment at the end, I think that works really, really well. And I know it might not come across as the most realistic, and there's a couple characters who make decisions that you think, would they really be that noble, really? But ultimately, I think it does work. And the ending, it does kind of hit you over the head, but it really hits home the point that the book is trying to make. Not to say that this is a preachy book, but the theme, you know, of the book is very clearly stated in how the book ends. So if you've heard people say, "Oh, I hated the ending. It didn't make sense. It came out of nowhere," just go into it thinking that this book is kind of in the same vein as like the musical version of Les Mis, you know, where it ends with like this massive barricade and everyone's singing about righteousness and all that. So the ending was controversial, and I did kind of ask a few questions about it, but having read it and been thinking about it for the past couple days, I think the ending does work. All right, and that is Babel. I could go on at length about this book, but I need to stop. Otherwise, I'll just keep ranting and raving. I loved this book. I want to reread it again. Maybe not right away, but I will reread this again. This isn't one of those books that you read it and you kind of go, that was okay, and then you move on and never touch it again. This is one of those ones I genuinely do want to read again. I highly recommend it. I think it is as fun as it is important. There's cultural criticism in there, but it is also just a great story. The character arcs are satisfying. The the growth and change that you see in them is wonderful. Robin is a great main character. Complex, flawed, interesting. This is a book that I wish it had like a fandom so we could kind of spend more time with it. But I genuinely really did love this. So I'm going to leave it at that, and then we'll go on. Thank you so much for watching these early videos of mine. Please like and subscribe if you want to continue to see more. I really enjoy doing this, and I want to kind of keep up with it. So you have a wonderful rest of your day or night, wherever you are, and I will see you next week. Bye.